You know, I was so excited when Aaron told me that he had met Lance Robertson in Washington, D.C. a few months ago and had talked to Lance about coming to this conference. I had the pleasure to meet Lance several years ago in Oklahoma while he was there serving as the Director of Aging Services within the Department of Human Services. And I was just thrilled when I heard that Lance had been appointed by President Trump in August of last year to come in as the Administrator and Assistant Secretary for Aging for the Administration for Community Living. I know firsthand that Lance has spent his time since August of 2017 traveling around the country, meeting with good folks, not only from Adult Protective Services, but any persons interested in the aging field. And he is our premier advocate for the federal government and on a national perspective. So I know you feel privileged to have Lance Robertson with us today. So will you give him a really great Tennessee welcome? Thank you, Lance, so much.
All right, let's get settled here. Good morning, everybody. Happy Wednesday. You glad to be here? You ought to be. You got coffee, bagel, mountains, great weather. Come on. No better place to be. And of course, a critical topic. Very honored to be here with all of you. Thank you so much. Really, I got to tell you, Paul, if you don't know, Paul has for a number of years nationally been our champion and our advocate around this issue. So if you haven't come up and shaken his hand, I'd ask that you do that. Number one, to just express to him his your thanks for the great work that he does in each and every day, and then also just a good contact, somebody that's really going to, I think, be willing to mentor along anybody who has questions and struggles and a passion for this particular issue. So Paul, thank you again for the great work that you do. I was out in San Diego, I think it was this spring, and had a chance to really help celebrate the fabulous work they're doing out there at a county level that really is a model and one that I've talked about pretty often. I want to also thank Aaron. You guys, all of you I assume know Aaron. What a great guy, huh? Put a wonderful event together, he and his team, I'm sure. For all of us that have been involved in conference work, we all know this stuff doesn't just happen by itself and out of sheer luck. There's a lot of work that goes into it. So again, I'm glad that you guys have all taken time out of your busy schedule to step away from your work, to step away from your family, to come here, to really associate and hopefully support one another in a common cause that is critical, of course, not only for your local community, but the state of Tennessee and much further beyond, which is why I'm here to talk a little bit about what's happening at the federal level. Want to also acknowledge, I want to say hello to some wonderful folks. You guys have a state representative with you. That's fabulous. Anytime you have an elected official with you, I think that's wonderful. So for those of you that, and turn off your Amber Alerts, have you guys all been getting hit with those too? Representative Kiesling, again, glad to have him here. It's always wonderful to have that type of support, which is imperative if any state wants to advance. So thank you for being here. You're going to hear from Dr. Littenberg, who's doing some wonderful things out of Wayne State. So looking forward to that conversation as well. I know that the Department of Health's involved here, and that's important. That was a big lift for us in the state of Oklahoma. It happened, but again, want to give a shout out to Sally and her team. And then also I know Kathy Whitaker, local AAA director here in the state of Tennessee. She said she's in the best part of Tennessee. Aaron, I don't know much about the debate that goes on within your state about the best part of Tennessee.
We always say that Tennessee stops at Knoxville's luxury.
Oh, okay. I don't know where Kathy's at. She may not agree, but anyway, it's really good to be with all of you. And I got to tell you, as I kind of read over the conference materials, here's what I got excited about. Here's what I liked. Of course, you're highlighting best practices. I think so often in today's society we rush to sort of find a solution and to talk about what's next, and sometimes we don't pause long enough to say, hey, what has happened that's worked well? What is happening? What are some models that can be replicated at all levels? So I'm glad you're highlighting best practices. I also like that you're asking tough questions. So often we as a society tend to avoid the most painful parts of any conversation. You're asking questions, are we doing it right? What can we do better? How will we get there? And I think that is fabulous. So again, I am glad that you are asking tough questions. Thirdly, I love your multidisciplinary approach. as Paul and anybody that's worked in this space, Peter and others will tell you, it's imperative for any effort to be successful in this particular space. And for it to be successful, you have to really approach it from a multidisciplinary approach. It takes everybody. And again, as I look through who all is participating, folks from higher ed, emergency response, of course, state aging and disability, APS, law enforcement, fire, financial services, media, and of course the health department. So many players, and it does take a village, and it takes everyone sort of marching alongside each other to make this work as impactful as it needs to be. So I'm very glad that you're doing multidisciplinary work and you're approaching that with all seriousness. So that would be my third thing that I was really impressed by. And then finally, your darn logo is cool. Have you guys seen your conference logo? That's pretty neat, right? Okay, Aaron likes it. I don't know about the rest of you, but I think it's great that you incorporated your state. And is it up here behind me? There it is. Yeah, that's a great logo. So anyway, those are some things that I really automatically admired about the work that you're doing here and this great conference. I'm here to tell you a little bit about what the federal government's doing in this work, specifically through the Administration for Community Living. And we're going to jump into that. Hopefully we'll have some time as well for some questions afterwards. If anybody has any questions, anything you want to share or discuss. I hope everyone's awake. Are you charged up? You ready to go? We're selling seats on the front row if anybody comes in and wants to move forward. Anyway, it's good to see such a great group of Tennesseans today, and again, glad to be here. As Paul mentioned, my background, raised by my grandparents, by the way. Anybody else raised by their grandparents? Yeah? Oh, man, you missed out. Not that that's often by default, but I was so blessed, really, to have my grandparents be such a strong influence in my life. Born and raised in Oklahoma, spent some time in the military, then had about a 12-year career in higher education before I transitioned into state service, worked for a couple different governors, and really during a critical time in Oklahoma where we talked about the path forward for aging and disability services. And this particular topic, though, elder abuse, became real to me back in 1994. I had just graduated with an undergraduate degree and had joined an advocacy academy that is really nationally renowned, based in Oklahoma, called the Oklahoma Aging Advocacy Leadership Academy. Essentially, it's a small, intimate cadre of folks who spend 10 months being trained on effective advocacy work, and you have to pick a platform. And for me, it was elder abuse. So my real touch with this issue dates back even before I got involved directly on a professional level. So again, I walk alongside you in appreciating how important this is, and I'm grateful for the work that you do each and every day. So that's sort of the roadmap for our limited time together. As always, if there's anything I can answer for you afterwards, just let me know. And the Administration for Community Living is always available to you as a resource at the local, state level, anytime we can do anything to help further your important work. So again, it's an honor to be here. Let me tell you a little bit about the Administration for Community Living. ACL is part of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, which is actually the largest federal agency. And for those that aren't aware, that is a $1 trillion federal agency. It's actually the 5th largest organization in the world. So we're part of a very large federal agency, which means we're always clamoring to make sure that the issues that are critical to us get to the secretarial level and the cabinet level. So again, the work that you do each and every day is something I take forward. Nothing is more impactful than to be able to share those stories. And as I've mentioned to Aaron and others, I have an opportunity. It's a blessing, an honor in this role to get to work with Secretary Azar, who runs HHS, Attorney General Jeff Sessions, many others. So at every opportunity, as you can imagine, I am constantly just pumping out there those stories and examples of things that are happening at the state and local levels that are making a difference. Why? Because it matters to them, just like it matters to me. So if you ever wake up one day and kind of wonder, man, is the work I'm doing important? Do people appreciate it? Do the feds even care? Yes. And a matter of fact, again, the more of those great stories we can capture, you can count on them being shared. So in 2012, the federal government created ACL, and they brought together the Administration on Aging and the Administration on Disabilities, and also the Administration on Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. Those were the 3 larger program platforms that were all brought together in 2012. And then the portfolio sort of grew from there. We started adding a number of other specialized programs. I call them things like our independent living, assistive technology, and traumatic brain injury programs. We have a large $100 million research institute that focuses on rehab research. We also do paralysis and limb loss resource work, and then we do some meaningful work in the Medicare space. Any SHIP counselors? Any SHIP folks in the room? A few people? You should raise those hands high. You should be proud. The work you do is so timely and critical for this particular conference. So again, we're a diverse family. I think it's a wonderfully effective family, but we're still sort of, like all good families, learning to love one another and to work collaboratively in ways that are meaningful. Our work includes advocating, of course, for people with disabilities and older adults across the federal government, which is no small chore, because so much of what we do, of course, each and every day just makes sense to us. It's intuitive, but of course at the federal level, with all the different programs and the trillions of dollars that are spent on such a variety of services for Americans, it's important that we have a federal agency out there that really helps champion, first and foremost, the needs of older adults and people with disabilities. We also do a lot of training and education. We fund a lot of that. We do a lot of that ourselves. And then, of course, as I mentioned, we do a lot in the research area. Most people wouldn't know that, because until research is translated, you're not really sure what's happening in that space. But we're doing some great work around research and innovation. But like all federal agencies, the biggest part of what we do is we send money out the door. We send it to the state and local level to make sure that great things are happening. And that's represented in this room today with so many of you. You know, most of the little over $2 billion that we share at ACL goes straight out and means services and supports for people that need it. So we're most proud of that. And of course, everything that we do ties in ultimately to preventing and addressing elder abuse. We have to make sure that people are healthy and whole, protected, and able to live empowered lives. You may not know, but ACL is now the home for the Adult Protective Services Program at the federal level. Very proud of that. That just happened a few years ago, and most people didn't realize that. You know, we're all familiar. We've grown up being familiar with child welfare services and all the different supports that exist for that, and that's wonderful. But that same type of support has not existed at the federal level in coordinating what we do for older adults who are vulnerable or exploited. So we are proudly the home for the APS program at the federal level. That's where the appropriations come through and get sent out. We are advocating each and every day to make sure that more federal dollars go into that important work. So again, in a nutshell, that's ACL. We are proud to work with over 22,000 different community-based organizations that we help fund and support. And like I said, I know many of you are in the room. Our work collectively has never been more important. For a lot of folks that don't fully understand or appreciate just the demographic part of that conversation, think about the merit behind the criticality of our work. Think about the 57 million folks who are living with a disability. Think about the 65 million Americans who are 60 and older. Appreciate the fact that most of those folks don't live in institutions. Most of those folks live in the community, which is where our responsibility rests. Of course, those numbers are growing. The pressure is growing on our programs. We're not even talking about an unduplicated count of caregivers. All told, when I went through Senate confirmation, we tallied it up, and it was about 140 million Americans that at the end of the day, ACL is very honored to represent. You are very honored to represent. We are very honored. So again, our work is all about community living. How do we make sure that at the end of the day, we are empowering and we are enabling individuals and caregivers and families to live independently and function in their community in a way that's important to them. And it's always such a chuckle for me because consistently we talk about, and you may be guilty of the same, we always talk about them. But you recognize we're also talking about us, right? At the end of the day, there will come a time when every one of us in this room will find ourselves in a position of having to balance, can we remain effective and healthy and stable and protected in the community, or are we going to be faced with having to have that sort of service delivered to us in an institutional setting? So the work that we do in supporting community living as a collective group, again, has never been more important. Let me show you real quickly a video. Okay, where's my clicker? Hold on. Oh, I found my clicker. All right. I think Glenn's switching me over here. Hold on. Say hello to your neighbor. Say good morning if you haven't already. Tell them thank you for being here.
Communities are made up of all kinds of people, including people with disabilities and older adults. Everyone contributes to a community's strength. A healthy community supports each person's choices about how and where they live, and values the inclusion of all its members. We all enjoy a better quality of life when we can live in a home of our choosing with the people we love. But it's not as easy for some as it is for others. The number of older adults and people with disabilities in the U.S. is growing. Someday, you or someone you care about may belong to one of these populations. Many will need a little bit of help to continue to thrive at home, like transportation, homemaker services, or home-delivered meals. Without this help, the community might lose its rich variety of voices and perspectives. People we care about may not be able to live in the neighborhoods they love, and institutional settings can become the only option. Besides a loss of independence and connection to the community, there's also a steep financial cost associated with life in a nursing facility. And public residential facilities for people with disabilities can cost even more. Community living is a win-win for both individuals and their communities. The Administration for Community Living works with states, agencies, tribes, and communities to help older adults and people with disabilities preserve their basic right to live independently, with dignity, participating fully in their communities. By investing in research that leads to better options, making services more available and easier to access, and advocating for individuals and families, ACL makes communities stronger. Community living is important to everyone. To learn more, visit acl.gov and follow us on Facebook at /ACLGov and on Twitter at ACLGov.
All right, wonderful. Thank you, Glenn. Appreciate that, queuing that up. Great video, right? Simple, to the point. It's on our website. I would hope that for everyone in this room, that you'll take a step back and remember that if I were to give you a charge, I would say we are all community living advocates first and foremost. The work that we do won't really matter more specifically if we can't help decision makers and those that help appropriate funds to appreciate what community living is all about. Again, that's also deeply personal for all of us. So again, there's great value there. So how do we advance that conversation? How do we continue to really, I'll say specifically on Capitol Hill, make those legislators aware of what's happening, what's important? How do we move the needle? How do we continue to effectively serve Americans who want that community living opportunity? It really, to date, and I've been in this role about 13 months, it involves that centralized conversation, that unifying conversation around pillars. There we go, the 5 pillars. Some of you guys heard of the 5 pillars? The ACL 5 pillars? Good, a few people. Now everyone in this room will have heard of them. There's value in this, and you can imagine, and this started back early last summer, again, when I was going through the Senate confirmation process and had the honor to speak with every one of those members of Congress who were going to vote on my nomination, and really each one of them, of course, was asking, what's important? What are we going to do? What's the focus going to be? So we began pulling together this theme, this nexus of focus that really will help us advance the great work that we do. So you see the 5 pillars listed up there. The thing that I appreciate the most about them is the fact that they're unifying, they're relatable, they're pretty easy to explain. Most people have had personal experiences with all of this stuff, but most critically, as we continue to do great work in these 5 areas, we're going to move the needle. We're going to, as my secretary likes to say it, put points on the board. He's a sports guy, which is my language. We're going to put points on the board. We're going to do some great things that make a difference. But of course, to be the most effective, we have to make sure we're having some focused conversations around critical things such as the 5 pillars that you see up there. We are, of course, today focusing on that 5th pillar. You'll see the 5th pillar there. How do we make sure that in our work we are doing all that we can to prevent and fight abuse? So that's, again, going to be the focus of what I want to share with you today relative to, again, what the federal government's doing. I think we all could agree that every American, regardless of age or disability, deserves the right to live with dignity, independence, and justice. When an injustice is perpetrated by abuse, neglect, or financial exploitation, we must all work together to levy a bold response. As you know, the most reliable data when we're talking about the prevalence of elder abuse tells us that 1 in 10 older people are abused, neglected, or exploited each year? There we go. This is tricky. So again, you know as well as I that those numbers are an underrepresentation. We all know that probably more than 1 in 10 folks are abused in some way. We also know, and recent studies have validated, that over half, 50% of people with dementia are also abused and neglected. So again, that penetration rate is so much higher. The challenge, of course, we know is that so many people just simply don't report it. And in some cases, that is because of lack of awareness. They're not sure who to tell, where to go. All of you in the room are probably affiliated with some sort of hotline or helpline or something that is, again, intended to be that portal entry for someone who needs assistance. And I don't know about you, but each and every day, and that's why it's one of my 5 pillars, we got to make sure information is getting out there so that people know where to start. And I can tell you that it also happens in every family. There's no family that is financially protected from this or has the relational protections that would prevent abuse. Every family is subject to this. And as Paul knows, I've even this year dealt with not one, but at least 2 different cases in my own family where abuse has become very obvious. And in one case, it's an uncle who has been being financially exploited by his son. And the travesty is by the time they let me know, that abuse had been happening, I would say, for at least 6 to 7 months, to the tune of tens of thousands of dollars, which in Oklahoma money is still pretty real. And let me tell you, that really boiled my blood to think in my own family, I had not prepared people to know where to turn. That it took them that long to wake up one day and go, oh, we ought to let Lance know. So again, I would challenge all of you, as I did when I spoke in March in San Diego to Paul's group. The biggest prescription for battling this is a singular one, and that is when you look in the mirror in the morning, that's the person that's got to take this challenge on. You got to champion it, not just in the work you do, but within your own household. And that's where I think ultimately the secret sauce rests. So we know that this is a big problem. We see the headlines. We know that so many folks are impacted by this. Again, we talk about numbers all day, but the reality is it's there. We all acknowledge that. That's why we're here today. That's why we all gathered in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. Besides the apple fritter, apple donut, something you had, Paul, that sounded very good. And by the way, beautiful place. Never been to Gatlinburg, but wow, what a beautiful place you guys all get to celebrate in a wonderful state. But then the question is, okay, what's the federal government doing? Again, I know within your local area, maybe for some of you that work at the state level, your issues are very real. They're very on the ground, right in front of you. I, like you, had asked for so many years, what's the federal government doing? Ultimately, pretty big bully pulpit and a lot of money that goes out the door to fund key initiatives. So what is the federal government doing? Why did Lance hop on one of the smallest planes he's ever flown on to fly into Knoxville, Tennessee, to come tell you about what the federal government's doing? Because I believe it's important, and I'm glad to spend a few moments telling you about that. So really at the Administration for Community Living, as I unfold it for you, we are proud and honored to oversee a range of federal programs that are entirely dedicated to addressing the issue of elder abuse, which of course includes physical abuse, emotional and verbal abuse, neglect, self-neglect, and financial exploitation. In 2014, ACL created the Office of Elder Justice and Adult Protective Services. This office oversees grant funding related to adult protective services, legal services to the elderly, and the long-term care ombudsman program, as well as income security initiatives. The office administers funding. Here we go, catching up. Making sure you're listening, right? Making sure what I say matches up there. Okay. Those are the 3 things that I just referenced that our particular center does on elder abuse and APS. We also fund a number of technical resource centers. Wow. I'm going to have a talk with the staff that put this PowerPoint together. I'm going to get carpal tunnel on my thumb here, right? All right, so anyway, we do fund five different technical resource centers that, again, operate very effectively in this space. And there could be some representatives from some of these here. Oftentimes we'll go to the conferences, folks that are affiliated with these resource centers are here, and I'm so proud of the work that they do. If you don't know about these 5 TA centers, I would hope that you'll search them out. You can, of course, Google their names. You can also jump on the ACL website. These, of course, are intended to be resources for you. So if you're unaware of them, then darn it, we need to make sure you know that they're available for you, both in the specific work that you do and then more general in your advocacy work. So one of them is the National Center on Elder Abuse. We also fund the National APS Technical Assistance Resource Center. The third one is the National Long-Term Care Ombudsman Resource Center. And then we have the National Center on Law and Elder Rights. And then finally, the National Education and Resource Center on Women and Retirement. Did all 5 show up? Oh! Okay. Hey, no. Okay, all right. Well, here's what we're going to do. We're gonna catch up to this here in a moment. So again, those are the 5. They all have long names. Surely there's a slide up here we'll get to in a moment that lists all 5 of them. My apologies. But they are, again, funded technical assistance centers with federal dollars to help support the work that you do at the local and state levels. So again, please make sure that if you don't need to use them regularly, that you make sure others that need to be aware are aware of those 5 technical resource centers. Talking a little bit about APS specifically. Again, I'm so proud of the mounting appreciation now for the work that APS has done. Long overdue, long overdue. So any APS workers in the room? APS workers in the room? Hey, all right. People are getting more proud and raising their hands as I ask for program affiliations. You ought to be if you're with APS. The work that you do is critical. We are, of course, at ACL working very hard to support the building of APS of tomorrow. And really, what does that mean? Well, that's putting a stake in the ground way out there that says for APS to be as supported and as effective as we all want it to be, we've got to get there. And let's unwrap that for a little bit. Like I said, there's really not, until just a few years ago, been a federal home for APS, and at ACL we're very proud to be that home and to help with those federal appropriations. The difficulty, of course, has been that historically, at the local and state level, people that have found this issue to be important have built their own systems, which makes sense. That's the way America works a lot of times. We recognize a need, we go out there and we meet it. The difficulties you can imagine once we're trying to pull it all together at the federal level is just how varied everything is. There's just all across the board, all sorts of ways that APS programs operate and are funded, and I think all of that is celebrated. Our question is, how do we pull in some of the commonalities so that we can effectively support the program as a whole? So, you know, we really, again, despite that variability, are proud of some things that are happening that is helping build that APS of tomorrow that the federal government can really get behind and support, and I want to talk a little bit about that. So let me cover a few of those things. Okay, so again, I talked about the federal home. That's awesome. That kind of lays the groundwork. You have to, and by the way, when we changed our center's name within ACL, we added APS in the name. Because again, if you think about the enormous number of conversations happening at the federal level, if you don't even have your program's name out there, people are just not going to know. So we have it in the name. ACL is proudly the home of APS. That's fabulous. So now, again, some specific examples of some things that are happening that I think will really help advance and put us down that path towards meeting that stake in the ground that I referenced. The first is the National Voluntary Consensus Guidelines. And in 2014, we began really facilitating the development of this field-driven, consensus-informed national guideline structure for state APS systems that we know will provide a core set of principles and common expectations and will encourage consistency in policies and practices, and that is so important. The national guidelines build on existing work that APS agencies are doing all across the country, and of course we tied in structurally around some things that have been in place for a long time, like the Child Welfare System program or the Long-Term Care Ombudsman program as examples. Of course, these guidelines were developed based on the best science available on practices and policies that we believe produce the best outcomes for individuals. So through these guidelines, ACL is seeking to ensure that adults are afforded the similar protections and service delivery that every American has a right to, regardless of their state or jurisdiction. And the goals of this consistent approach are for the enhancement of partnerships and the effective, efficient, and culturally appropriate delivery of both services to victims and responses to perpetrators. At the same time that ACL was developing these APS guidelines, we're finishing up the design of the very first comprehensive national reporting system, which I'll talk about next briefly, called NAMERS, the National Adult Maltreatment Reporting System. NAMERS went live NAMERS went live in 2016. And of course the goal is again to provide that consistent, accurate national data on the exploitation and abuse of older adults and adults with disabilities as reported again through the APS agencies. NAMERS is really a game changer. And it helps us in understanding the character of elder abuse as reported through APS. It also helps us appreciate the volume, the response, and the outcomes of APS's work. And I can tell you that only in the second year of data collection, only the second year in data collection, we had responses from all 50 states. And by the way, this is voluntary. So when you talk about a voluntary data collection effort where in year 2 everyone participates, that's pretty unheard of within federal ranks. So we're so proud of that. And I think Tennessee was one of the first to report. I don't know that. I just thought that sounded great. And wanted to give you all a shout out. I'm sure you were one of the first states to report wherever our APS friends are at again. And we're so glad because NAMERS again fills a void that was really obvious to everybody. So when you talk to folks, even including the Government Accountability Office, GAO, so many folks had said within the APS program that gap is the evidence. We have to make sure that we can consistently across all states demonstrate what's happening, and NAMERS does that. Another thing that we're very proud of relative to APS are the state grants, and of course as the name would indicate, those are dollars that we're sending out to the states that help really create better innovation and improvements in practice, service delivery, data collection, et cetera. So again, we're very proud of the work that's happening around the state grant stuff. Yes, I will be having a conversation with our PowerPoint people when I get back to DC. So building again, the APES talking about grants, building on that conversation about state grants in 2015. We funded 13 grants, and in 2016 we funded an additional 11 grants. By the end of this month, we'll be announcing that we're funding another 14. So you're talking about now nearly getting close to national coverage relative to supporting the great work being done by APS through the innovation grants that are offered by ACL. Some of the results we're seeing are spectacular, and again, they really help us with the quality assurance conversation. As with all federal programs, I call it now the Mulvaney test. Most of you are familiar at the federal level. We have Director Mulvaney, who I want to make sure if he walks in and sits down beside me and says, "Tell me about APS," that whatever we share passes the Mulvaney test. And I mean that in all spirit of making sure that the efficacy is there, making sure that the quality assurance is there, and making sure that the impact is very obvious. We work for a president that's very much about return on investment. We as taxpayers certainly want to embrace that as well. The money that we're paying in, that gets sent out, how well is that being spent? That applies to APS and everything else that we fund at ACL. So again, very proud of what's happening there. And like I said, those 3 projects, the APS voluntary guidelines, NAMERS, and the grants, all 3 are directly supporting the wonderful work that's happening at APS, and that is so, so very important. So talking a little bit about the innovation grants. This is fun. Talking about the innovation grants, I can tell you that the Office of Elder Justice and APS also manages our Elder Justice Innovation Grants. So we're talking about APS grants. We also have innovation grants that focus specifically on elder justice, which supports, again, the development and advancement of emerging practices that help prevent and respond to abuse of older adults and people with disabilities. And these projects, of course, are expected to contribute to the evidence base of knowledge and create materials and programs that can be replicated and disseminated across the country. So, as I mentioned to Aaron and others, you guys are doing some fabulous things here in Tennessee. The thing you should be most proud of is, again, when the federal government and other partners, for that matter, pick up what you do and share it, and hopefully it is then replicated in other states. So that's part of what we try to do through the innovation grants. In 2016, we funded 8 grants in 4 targeted areas: abuse by guardians, abuse in Indian country, the issue of self-neglect, and elder abuse forensic center models. And then in 2018, we funded 5 grants in 3 different targeted areas. So again, the focus of that conversation specifically around Elder Justice Innovation grant work really is purposeful, and it's tying into that really that specified need that we know is out there. That's where we want to best put those innovation dollars to use. So then let's talk about something I get asked a lot about is the vision for elder abuse. So again, we're talking about at a larger level, at the high platform level, discussions for elder abuse. What's the vision? Where are we going? So you can see here that, of course, the vision is to create a system at the federal, state, and local levels that provides supports to older adults and people with disabilities that enable them to live with dignity in the setting of their choosing without their quality of life being diminished by the significant negative effects of abuse, neglect, and exploitation. So again, that would be our mission about where we're going with our elder abuse program work. It's a coordinated, systematic approach to preventing, investigating, and responding to adult maltreatment, and it is the essence of a key, timely effort that must happen in a seamless fashion. To be seamless, the system cannot be limited to one field or sector, such as prevention, intervention, and response activities. Those things fall across multiple sectors. To be systematic, however, all sectors need to be incorporated, including social services, health and behavioral services, law enforcement, legal and justice services, long-term care services, and of course the financial services industry as well. And I can see again from what you're doing here in Tennessee, you embrace that multidisciplinary approach. Such a coordinated and integrated system will prevent abuse, neglect, and exploitation. It will provide early indication of those folks that are being victimized. It will also create a more efficient response system, and it will hold perpetrators accountable. Most importantly, a unified system displays the value the nation places on older adults and the contributions that they make as members of our society. So let's talk now a little bit about, in the ongoing visit about what the federal government's doing, let's talk about the Elder Justice Coordinating Council, something Peter and I were talking about a bit earlier. We have also been at ACL responsible for enacting the provisions that were passed in the Elder Justice Act, which was passed in 2010. It's an effort to coordinate a multidisciplinary federal effort by law enforcement, public health, and social services to address elder abuse, neglect, exploitation, which also includes financial abuse. So the Elder Justice Act created the Elder Justice Coordinating Council. The Elder Justice Coordinating Council is really doing some phenomenal things. And the energy, the momentum, the synergy, I think at this time has been unmatched. And really excited to tell you that ACL, of course, is not the only federal agency involved in elder abuse work. As a matter of fact, we now are up to 13 different federal partners who are part of the Elder Justice Coordinating Council. And again, their focus is to pull things together, to coordinate, to make sure that our work as a federal government is effective in the space of elder abuse. It is actually chaired by the HHS Secretary, who's sitting in the middle, Mr. Alex Azar. You'll probably recognize Attorney General Jeff Sessions with him. Those two gentlemen sort of co-chair it. That obligation has been proxy to me, so I get to chair this meeting and really work very closely with those 13 federal agencies to assure that there is real synergy in what we're trying to do and what we're moving forward in trying to accomplish. We work very closely as examples with the Treasury Department, Federal Trade Commission, Social Security Administration, and many others to, again, help spark innovation, and that's what it's all about. The Elder Justice Coordinating Council is charged with identifying and proposing solutions to the problems surrounding elder abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation. The council is a permanent group. We meet a couple times a year, and the goal, of course, is, again, that better federal response being in a coordinated and more effective, delivered in a more effective manner. We receive constant input and support, though, from a working group. We have federal employees who, within our cabinet level agencies, are working to have that everyday conversation, and that's where, again, through the working group, a lot of the things that happen at the local and state level emerge up to the Elder Justice Coordinating Council, which we're excited about. The next meeting is December 5th, and of course we will be live streaming that from Washington, D.C. We hope you will listen in. Has anybody ever observed one of our Elder Justice Coordinating Council meetings? You're missing out. You are missing out. So mark your calendar, break it out right now, get your phone out, December 5th. I don't know the time, sorry. It's probably 1 o'clock Eastern. We'll get that to you. But again, I hope you'll listen in and you'll appreciate what's happening at the federal government level. For me, it's always inspiring to know that as we go across the table and all 13 federal agencies report out, there's some phenomenal things happening. Phenomenal. That as citizens are happening that we may not know about. You knowing about it creates one more champion and helps us, again, spread the word of what's happening out there. So we're excited about what's happening with the Elder Justice Coordinating Council, some of the different partnership work that's happening. We, again, work most closely with the Department of Justice. And really, the focus most recently has been on rural frontier issues around elder abuse. A.G. Sessions has really made that an issue for him. Of course, he's from Alabama, which is a relatively rural state by consideration. So is Tennessee, so is Oklahoma, so is most of America. So again, I think it was encouraging that the Attorney General recognized that it's not just in large urban settings where resources tend to be a bit more robust that we're going to target and address things. We're going to try to reach out and make sure that we're taking good care of folks that live in rural settings. Let me jump ahead here. We're doing a lot of work around civil legal aid. Do we have some legal aid attorneys in the room? I think we do. I know we have some local DAs and some folks that focus in on some of that work. I know that we're doing at ACL some real focused work on financial exploitation. Matter of fact, we've got a training model that's coming out. It's one of the first, and I believe that it is going to actually be tested here in Tennessee. And I do mean that, by the way. I do know that as fact. The other thing about being the first namers report, I don't know about that. But I do know that you're going to be one of the first states to help us test our financial exploitation model, which again is intended to help those that work in that civil legal aid space to really have the resources available and to know where to take for Tennesseans who are in need of help. Let me then pivot a little bit and wrap up, and I want to talk about something that is so pervasive and has really been troubling to all of us. It's required an all-in sort of effort to help address, and that is how do we fight this ongoing opioid epidemic? As all of you know, that's a priority of the president. It's also a priority of my boss, Secretary Azar. And just recently, HHS declared the opioid epidemic a nationwide public health emergency. And if you begin to really appreciate the unfolding of the data and the impact, it is phenomenal. It has laid at our doorstep for a long time unaddressed. And now, under this administration, we're really trying to work very boldly in addressing some of the challenges that are associated with the opioid epidemic. More specifically, in conversations I get to have, I really try to stress to decision makers, what does that mean for the older adult? Because so often when it comes to this particular conversation, those are the folks that are most directly impacted. In some ways directly, in some ways indirectly. But overall, if there was a cohort most impacted by the opioid epidemic, it's the older adult population. Okay, good. So again, it's a top priority. We know that older adults are at greater risk for abuse. The most profound impact of opioid-related cases, of course, we see through the APS work. We can appreciate how complex it is. It often involves not only the older adult, but certainly other family members that are being challenged through this epidemic. So our goal, of course, is to continue to support APS. We know that the challenges that they see today are only going to be compounded tomorrow and beyond. So we're working on how do we make sure we can support them in ways that are meaningful. Again, part of that is an individualized awareness. For all of us in this room, for people that you get to associate with each and every day, the challenge needs to be how do we make sure everyone we can touch walks away aware of how significant this opioid crisis is on Tennesseans. Some of the different challenges, if we just quickly touch on them, you know that there are many different ways that opioids can lead to abuse. Because older adults are more likely to be prescribed opioids, it comes as no surprise that their medicine cabinets become a target for theft. That's one way. We also hear heartbreaking stories of seniors whose pain is not properly managed because caregivers are not giving them their medications. We also know that addiction can drive family members to target the life savings of a lot of vulnerable older adults to help pay for these drugs, and sometimes they'll become violent if they are denied. So again, as we look to the future, we can appreciate some of the challenges that we face relative to this epidemic. If you jump on the HHS website, you'll see the Secretary's approach to how, again, we are tackling it from an HHS perspective, which is multifaceted, very complex, does involve that health side of HHS through the work of CDC and the National Institutes of Health and so many different others. But I also know, back to the rural comment, that in rural counties, I'm told, adults age 45 and older comprise 43% of opioid-related deaths. So again, in rural parts of America, adults age 45 and older comprise 45% of opioid-related deaths. So again, we have an issue for a growing elder population, we have an issue for caregivers, and it's a challenge in every community. I suspect in Gatlinburg, like it is in every other major community across Tennessee, certainly in the rural crevices of your state as well, and it is in every part of America. So behind me, I think, is a sort of puzzle when we start talking about that circling back to the multidisciplinary response to the work that we do. Specific to elder abuse, as I started off saying, and I'll kind of close by saying, it's going to take us all. It takes everybody. States that do it well have already kind of got this, and I'm standing in a state that understands this. That's why I think you are reflected in the puzzle pieces here when you begin to look at all the different folks that need to come to the table to help address this. The analogy we like to use sort of involves support beams. When you think about how interconnected and joined the work is that we do, for us to be the strongest as a community, we all have to work together. Again, that puzzle piece magnified through the analogy of support beams. If one beam is weak or missing, the house won't stand. So these services and supports that comprise this house must be continually improved. Many support beams, of course, are already in place. What we do as a society is we continue to add new beams to the existing structure to help strengthen it. For the best results, we need to maintain the old supports, and then we, of course, need to add the new ones where necessary. So what does all this look like to me relative to the network and what it means in real life, everyday work that you walk out this door and you do? For me, I think it's, again, that connectedness, that pulling it all together, where these are categorically groups of people, but even more specifically when we talk about all the different programs that are in place that in some ways directly, in many ways indirectly, help combat elder abuse. We're talking about such a robust and vital network that's already in place. And that's why I'm so excited to walk alongside you in supporting the aging and disability networks. We already have folks that are doing this great work. So the equation, the way to really help this at a local, state, and federal level is to continue to provide the much needed and overdue supports to help with this system. We already have the groundwork in place, we have the framework in place. We just need those supports. So for me, it's, again, how do we more vibrantly support the work that's done through Older Americans Act? How do we help APS programs? How do we support caregivers? How do we help the Ombudsman and legal services programs, and on down the list? Every one of those programs reflecting that beam, that structural support that we're talking about that helps the older Tennessean in any part of this state who may need assistance. Inevitably, some of the things that we all see happen, the portal, the gateway, the doorway to elder abuse is often because of a lack of fully supported services at a much simpler level. Maybe it's a lack of meal. Maybe it's a lack of a little bit of assistance with bookkeeping and finances. So many other different variables tie into what can inevitably become elder abuse. So let me close by talking a little bit about what the team gave me specifically for some shout outs that's happening here in Tennessee, such a great state. Your APS program is just finishing up an enhancement grant to improve its data collection system and to develop a coordinated community response model among state agencies working in the area of elder justice. And APS has done a great job on this project, and we commend them. Oh, there's that network I was talking about. Oh, there we go. There we go. All right, excellent. So again, the enhancement grant is one example I would give a shout out to, and thank you for the great work of the APS colleagues who are involved in that. Tennessee is also a current recipient of a 3-year Model Approaches to Statewide Legal Assistance Systems Grant. I'll repeat that. Model Approaches to Statewide Legal Assistance Systems Demonstration Grant. And this grant aims to improve the access of older Tennesseans with social or economic need to legal assistance that sustains their independence, self-determination, and access to community-based supports. The Model Approaches Grant is preparing to launch also a computer application that will provide law enforcement, district attorneys, Older Americans Act providers, and other public interest elder law attorneys and APS employees a resource that contains all of the Tennessee statutes on elder abuse, neglect, exploitation, as well as a community resources and screening tools to help determine if elder abuse, neglect, and exploitation have occurred. So a mouthful, but excited about that. And then finally, Tennessee's Model Approaches project includes the launching of a senior legal helpline, the very first senior legal helpline in the state of Tennessee. The helpline connects elders to resources for legal assistance and is responsive to legal issues emerging from cases of abuse impacting older adults. Through these efforts, older clients are able to use information, advice, and brief services to protect their independence and financial security. So again, as a closing comment, what a great job you're doing here in Tennessee. So proud to be here with you, to really acknowledge the things that are happening each and every day, for the great work that each one of you and every chair in this room is doing, and I commend you for that. Conferences like this give us an opportunity to learn and to connect and recommit. So again, my recommitment to you is to go back and continue championing the great things that are happening here. It's been an honor to be part of your day, and I wish you the best for the remainder of your conference. So thank you very much, Aaron and Paul.
We're ready to take some questions for Lance, so I'll come around with the microphone, please. Put up your hands. It must be. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Robertson. Okay, we've been hearing for the last couple days the emphasis on the growing population, attributed in large part to the generation known as the baby boomers. And then, so in the context of what, and that's impacting already, and it will continue, growing in numbers by leaps and bounds, our seniors in the ACL programs, et cetera. So in the context of all of that and what your agency is doing, what have there been talks about with respect to that being, I guess, more of a proactive approach rather than a reactive approach?
Very good. What was your name, please?
Margaret Chenard. I'm with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, and I'm involved in the East Tennessee Elder Justice Program. Okay, wonderful, Margaret. Thank you. Margaret's question, of course, involves that very sensible conversation that has been happening, is sort of long overdue to remedy, and that is that that demographic difficulty of more and more people needing more and more services. What's the federal government doing to respond specifically to that? You know, for me, it's always a sequenced approach in that conversation, because most folks that you talk to in decision level positions, they get it, they understand it. So it's really not a conversation that where you have to sort of convince them. The difficulty is when you have a finite number of services, it's about priority. Where do we make sure that the money first goes to take care of critical services? So I'm excited to tell you at the federal level, one thing we're really tying into, as a great example, one of the secretarial priorities involves a transformation of healthcare to a value-based system. So one that actually pays for results rather than just procedures. The beautiful thing about that conversation is the work that we do as community-based organizations supporting community living, that's what we do. It's less expensive, it's preferred, it's in a setting that is optimal. So now I do believe, honestly, Margaret, and for the rest of you that are interested, we are in an unmatched position, an unheralded position at the federal government level to make sure that community living is better appreciated, better funded, better supported, which will inevitably help us catch up to a degree with what's happening relative to the tsunami, the demographic trends that are out there. Will we ever get to that point? I don't know. I'm a realist. I wonder. The country has dug itself a hole that's significant enough. Will we ever get to the point where we're fully funding the needs of every old American and person with disability? Maybe not. I would love to see us, though, do some things that are highly admirable in gaining traction and heading that direction. So again, just know that even at the cabinet level, these things are now being
better appreciated, funded in ways that has been unprecedented, and I think the future's pretty bright. So thank you, Margaret, for the question. Any other questions?
All right. This helps me get rid of my apple cobbler. This is good. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. My name is Ardith Griffin. I'm with the Davidson County District Attorney's Office. My question is, I know that's one of your 5 pillars is protecting rights and preventing abuse.
Right.
Are there specific conferences or services that you're offering to prosecutors specifically to help assist in this niche area of prosecution?
Oh, great question, Artie. And I'll tell you as well, it's not just ACL, but Department of Justice, particularly for the line of work that you're in on the prosecutorial side. Department of Justice is doing some fabulous things. One of the things that they did by recent law is they have an elder justice coordinator now in every state. Maybe there's 2 in every state, Paul. Is there 1 or 2 in every state now? I think there's at least 1 elder justice coordinator in every state. So what we need to do is make sure, and Aaron may have that information, somebody will have that information on who is the Tennessee DOJ Elder Justice Coordinator. If I were a prosecutor, I would hunt that, I would find that person and make sure that you build that relationship and that you are seen as both a resource to them, but also make sure that as new things are rolling out that would be of interest to you, that you're aware. I know those folks would appreciate that. As a matter of fact, as that was rolling out, I met the person for California at Paul's event back in March. So I'm pretty sure now every state has one. The DOJ website may have that as well already. So I would encourage you, check that out. If you need any help, Paul can probably connect you. We'd be happy to help you out in that space. But that's definitely what I would do. Of course, ACL, as I kind of mentioned, we do a ton of stuff that programmatically we think will help prosecutors. Is it aimed at prosecutors? Not necessarily. Our network doesn't primarily consist of prosecutors, but in partnership with DOJ, your work is so critical for us, so thank you. Anybody else?
Yes, good.
Good morning. My name is Sonia Belafont. I am the director of the Tennessee Senior Law Alliance. One of your pillars has to do with connecting people to resources. And one of my concerns, particularly here in Nashville, is that as the amount of public housing begins to diminish, more older Americans are needing that access in order to be in a position to reach the resources in the community, particularly when they are disabled and unable to get out. And I understand there is now a council that's going to be addressing many of the issues that they're facing. How do they anticipate addressing that need as it grows at an alarming rate?
Right, absolutely, Sandra. And again, your question is specifically around affordable housing, which is huge. I would put that right up there along with transportation and some other local level services that, if void, sort of really weaken, diminish our ability to be effective. Affordable housing has long been a struggle, as we all know. But I can tell you, though, that, again, there is promise on the horizon. We actually have a meeting this Friday with Dr. Carson's team over at HUD. Really, at the federal level, we're trying to make sure that, given HUD's portfolio, and it's a large one, that more energy and resources are directed at affordable housing. We're going to argue for older adults and people with disabilities specifically. So, I can tell you that at ACL, we don't have any program work specifically directed at affordable housing. It's not in our scope, but we are champions right along with you, because we recognize that for community living to be effective, we have to make sure that we partner and work outside of our specific scope on critical matters like affordable housing, or again, we're just, we're not going to be nearly effective as we ought to be. So thank you, Sandra. That's a good question. Other thoughts, comments, questions? Right over here, Paul, behind you. Oh, there's one over here too.
There's one there and then one there.
Okay.
I'm Felicia Faust. I'm a volunteer with the Office on Aging and the Senior Center in Anderson County in Tennessee. And I don't see anywhere in your presentation anything about Offices on Aging, which in our case is sort of a front line for people, older people, to come to ask for help. And we do home visits. We do a lot of things through the Office on Aging. And I just wonder, does that fit in anywhere?
Oh, absolutely, Felicia. And thank you. That was sort of an assumption that, in backing up, maybe I shouldn't have made. You know, when I think about the aging network, not really the disability network, but the aging network, and that's actually the map. Never mind. You remember the U.S. map with all the different, okay. So the state units on aging and the area agencies on aging are reflected up there. Matter of fact, you know, at every opportunity I try to meet and talk with those leaders. N4A is the National Association for the AAAs, and then, of course, NASHWAT is for the state units. And their leadership work is imperative. It's critical for all of them that develop whether it's a state plan or a localized area plan. All of them have some element of abuse required in their state plan, how they're helping address that, how they're helping link resources. So I think they're all at the table. They're all a part of that conversation. At ACL, a lot of the money we send out the door goes to states. So the state unit on aging is a recipient of most of the Old Americans Act funding. That then is subgranted to all the different area agencies on aging, and from there out to some of the 22,000 network providers that I mentioned. So whether that's a meal service provider or a legal aid or all sorts of other entities that are part of that network. So thank you again for the question. We are proud to really support a vast network, and everyone's involved. Some more directly than others. So in the notes, we focus a little bit more on APS and legal aid and ombudsman, but for this conversation, just know there are many, many champions, some more directly than others, but we're all part of that same team. So thank you for your great question. Question in the back.
I'm Ramona Smith. I'm also with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. I am based out of Nashville, Tennessee. The Elder Justice Coordinator for Tennessee is Chris Sabis.
Wonderful.
Assistant U.S. Attorney Chris Sabis. And we have an Elder Justice Task Force meeting twice a year. And then we have our executive committee. We meet every other month.
That's perfect.
We're doing reporting out and training, community-based training for the federal level. So,
there we go. Good resource. Want to make sure if you need that, she's in the back of the room. Again, I really want to encourage you that that's not a program we're directly involved in. We partner with Department of Justice on that, but the work that was done through recent passage of federal law to put an Elder Justice DOJ coordinator in every state has been fabulous. I think that's excellent. That was unfunded. Attorney General Sessions found those dollars and is making it happen. At the federal level, the point of contact for us is Tony Bacon, and she actually serves as really that national coordinator. So very spirited and focused individuals. So again, great things are happening at the federal level through the work at DOJ. So glad you pointed out that resource. Thank you. I think we are out of time.
Well, we got time for one more question for Lance before he heads out. Anyone?
Make sure it's on this side of the room.
Yes, it's on this side of the room. It is. I'll go through here. Thank you.
I'm curious to know if you have any plans to standardize some procedures with APS, because it's different across the states, and
right.
In some states they investigate anything, and other states it's only when it's related to a caregiver.
Sure.
So I was curious about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's kind of a multifaceted sort of question, because honestly, since APS programs were grown from the local level and state levels, we at the federal level, as you well know, under this president, we are not interested in piling on more mandates or requirements to local and state entities. So there will remain a lot of that flexibility. What we are committed to doing at the federal level is creating better continuity and consistency. How that conversation happens is through data collection. And I'm always looking at Peter and my fellow academic friends, because we all know that unless you got the data to back the work that you're doing, it doesn't have the strength it needs. So while I think our administration will always appreciate and respect and support the local and state level flexibility and variation that may exist, because at the end of the day, you need to best determine how to serve Tennesseans, and that may vary a little bit from how you serve Oklahomans or Kansans or Hawaiians or I don't know, pick a state. But what I can tell you again, the commitment from the federal government level involving data is going to help create conversations that haven't really ever happened. So that is, while your service measures and some of your quality metrics and the things that are happening in each and every state may be a little different, we do have to create a common tool by which we can gauge all that. That's NAMERS. That's also around the guidelines that I mentioned. So there's at least two or three different things that, if I were you, I'd be encouraged to say, okay, we're at least heading in that direction. Actually at a more accelerated rate than we anticipated. To think that within the second year we had all 50 states participate in reporting through namers, that's phenomenal. I think our trajectory had a 5-year benchmark. So to know we're way ahead of that, I'm really encouraged. And I think it just speaks to all of us appreciating how important it is. If, to your question, if at the end of the day we want more federal resources going into APS's work, it's only going to come through convincing data. And for folks like Director Mulvaney and others, that's how decisions are made. That's the only pure way to make key decisions around federal resources. So thank you for your great question. So again, I just want to tell all of you it's been an absolute honor to be here with you. I'm so encouraged by your work. Count me as your biggest fan. And thanks again for an opportunity to come to Tennessee and say hello. Have a good one.
Thank you so much.